Be comfortable as you are. I think that's the essence, even though I may say something different under a very stressful condition. So that's one. The other is that, as Nakayama-san said, figure out the way to play with God's play, the game that God had set for us humans. So be comfortable as you are, and you can play with God's game. Do you know what God's game is? There's a way we are set up to live on the earth. And if you call that is the law of universe or the God's play, we are being played. Because we got this brain and the mind to think. So without thinking, you're like a vegetable or monkey or cat, as you are. So you are comfortable as you are. So if you combine those two together, you get the point of to be comfortable as we are. We know how the God's game is, and we know how to play with it. So how do we know what the God's game is that we are to play with? The one who play with is the mind, because without mind you cannot play. Monkeys cannot play. They are just already is the God's way, or the laws of nature, or laws of universe. So they are as they are, Garden of Eden. Whatever the reason we picked up this brain, evolving perhaps from the monkey or chimpanzee, whatever, but don't you think it's a wonderful game to play? Playfulness. You don't know what the God's game is, then you cannot play. So how do you know what the God's game is? The laws of the universe. For one, we look around, everything is a manifestation of the God's game, laws of the universe. And me talking like this is the result of the God's game being played out. Except me, the entity, so I may believe, think at my own will to do something separate from God's game, yet you can connect to the God's game. You are bridging the gap. You know what the God's game is, and you know what I'm doing. So what's the God's game? How do you know that? That's a Zen Koan. One koan says, meet the original self before your parents were born. It sounds weird, perhaps, but it's pointing something at the source of who we are and meet them. How do you meet? That's again Zen Koan. It's not to be answered by the logic, but to be experienced. It's called awakening or enlightenment. That there's something out there, the source of universe, God's game being played out, and you experience how that God's game is played out. And when you experience it, possibly your body is shaken and the energy is flowing and you're in bliss, let's say. I just read the Eckhart Tolle's book. Again, at the beginning, he's talking about his awakening experience. And he's talking about the shaking part. But before get there, actually, he felt that he wanted to commit suicide. And he couldn't stand what's going on in himself. So there's two he. He see himself unbearable. And the first he, you might call it, that's the God. But without that name, because the God is too much of a name, you tend to use the laws of universe. You find how the laws of universe is played out as a direct experience. So you awaken that there's something else than who you are. And that experience is so profound, blissful, beyond any thought. It opens up a unique eyes, like a third eye, some may call it, that there is that something without form, law of nature manifesting, law of universe, whatever the term, or God, play. So you learn how to play with God is to know how you access, connect to that entity or no entity, because you cannot grasp it, but you can only be one and feel the connection. And that's the story he shared. And my awakening experience on the 8th day of Vipassana meditation was very similar, except his much deeper awakening state than mine. Or in my case, I'm still in between and go back and forth. When I'm with the God's game played out, my senses, the resonance, and transparency, which I mentioned in my videos. And there's the sense of blissfulness, vibration, shaking sense, transparency that I feel. But not all the time, but I can access very quickly, in a minute or a few seconds even. That's the sense of oneness you might use. But the words doesn't mean anything without the experience. But if you know it and how it manifests in our being, in a physical sense or a spiritual sense or the psychological way, or wisdom and compassion comes out from that, you are playing the game of God. So you can call it. And when you have that, or without having, because you cannot possess it, if you connect to that, then you have this sense of being comfortable as you are, without any fear. but the peaceful sense. No worries. And that state is beyond the mind. No mind, empty mind. Eckhart Tolle talks about vast emptiness. In Zen, it's nothingness. Or a circle without the center. Because center is everywhere. That sense, giving to me or anyone, you have to ask Eckhart Tolle if he feels the same. But my sense is that if you have that, you have this sense of comfortable as you really are. Not as you are in the mind, but you are also as you really are. So those two, you and you really are the same connection. And there's no question anymore. Therefore, resonance, vibration, even within that emptiness, there is that awareness of being. That's Satori in Zen terms. And with that connection, you still go back to the world and do the work. That's the bodhisattva. When you do that, you feel the pain of people because you have you as a mind and you have you as the eternal you. So you still have this connection, and therefore you feel sadness, tears may flow. There's a compassionate sense. Not all the way without the mind, but because of the mind, you still can connect and reach out or do something and even feel the pain. That's in the Vimarakirti Sutra. People suffer, therefore I suffer. Christ might have said something like, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing. That's one expression. But people suffer, therefore I suffer. For whatever reason, I like that expression. More immediate sense to me. You have this human sense, but you can reach out to the other side and figuring out the way to connect. So the play of God is actually becoming a bodhisattva's war of helping people. So you can say it's not the play or the game. Or if it's a game, it's a very compassionate sense. So on one end, you feel fun-loving being at times, but at other times, you're working to bridge the gap so that there's peace in human being existence, awakening, or connection to the root or source, the God's play, the laws of universe. Well, I use too many words. It's not in the word what the word is pointing. So be comfortable as we are and know how to play the God's game. But being human, do the work. Don't sit in a cave somewhere. So it's not a game, but it's a game. And there's that sense of resonance, transparency, vibration, awareness, connecting. As Daisetsu Suzuki says, like a grabbing the live wire. Zzz, or blissful sense that you are melting into the nature or the universe.